I'm going to take a look at all of the push rods. So basically we're not going to have any elevator compensation whatsoever. What's up everybody, I'm Adam, you're watching Model Aviator, and this week we have something a little different for you. I've had several people, some buddies of mine at the field and some people online, ask us to do a video on how it is we maiden airplanes for other people. A lot of folks know that I do that for a lot of people, and I've seen it done several different ways. I've actually seen good pilots be handed a transmitter and asked if they could maiden an airplane, and off they go. That's the extent of it, and I've seen other people be a good bit more methodical about it. My approach is I take it relatively seriously, at least as serious as I'd take it if it were my airplane. I understand that when somebody goes up to a more experienced pilot or a more skilled pilot, more experienced modeler, and they ask them to maiden their airplane, they're deferring to them. They're asking them for their expertise, and they believe that that person is the best chance of survival for their new airplane. So I try to treat it as such and make sure that the owner of the airplane understands that I'm taking things seriously. So I check everything. Depending upon who the person is and how experienced they are will determine the extent that I go. If I don't know someone, I'm going to check everything very methodically. In this particular case, I'm maidening a P-51, Freewing P-51 from my buddy Carl. He is an experienced modeler, so when you see me check things like, is the prop and the spinner tight, I literally just grab them and wiggle them just to see if there's something glaring. If it were a newer person or someone that I didn't really know very well, I might go as far as putting a tool on those things and taking that spinner off and making sure that prop is tight. It's good to go through stuff like that for less experienced people so that they see what you're checking and understand how important it is. So a couple things to understand. The process I'm going to go through is going to take several minutes because I'm explaining to you what I'm doing. With this particular P-51, the check would only take me 2 or 3 minutes, including checking the transmitter. It takes longer because I'm explaining what I'm doing. With simpler planes, it may only take 30 seconds or a minute to check things out, just depending upon what it is. Obviously, if it's an ultra micro, there's not a whole lot to check. You can visually check it in just a few seconds. You can check the transmitter in a few more seconds, and you're good to go. But I do try to put my best foot forward and help people as much as I can. This particular morning, there was no one at the field other than Carl, Heidi, and myself, so there are no interruptions. There is some how to check an airplane out and how to maiden an airplane value to this video period. Just know, if this were my airplane, everything you're seeing me do at the field would have been done right here on the bench in a controlled environment with no interruptions. Obviously, we didn't get interrupted at the field because we were the only ones there this morning. If it is a busier field, you can't be afraid to back people off. I mean, you have to be a jerk about it, but you need to tell them, I'm focused right now, I'll talk to you in a minute. If you do get interrupted, it might even be worth doing what I was taught to do with a full-scale pre-flight check, which is if you get interrupted big time, you just start over. That way you know you didn't miss anything. So just something to think about. A couple things. I did check the balance of the airplane. You don't see me do that on camera. I actually did that off camera before we ever even started. What I'm looking to do is just get the airplane ready for flight. We'll go to the field and you'll see that. Then you'll see the maiden flight and then a flight once we get the airplane pretty well set up, and I'll be explaining things along the way, so check this out. All right, we are here at the field. I am with my buddy Carl Pankey, and you have, looks like the high-power Freewing P-51 Old Crow.
And that is correct. I got it from Ocean RC, and it is the Freewing.
That is it's a pretty cool airplane. This one's been around a while. I'm actually excited about this because I've never had an opportunity to fly one, and Carl has asked me to maiden this airplane. And even though Carl is an experienced modeler and he's used to setting airplanes up, obviously, like we talked about on the bench, anytime somebody wants me to maiden an airplane, I'm going to go over everything. I feel responsible for it once they ask me for my expertise, so I'm going to utilize that for them. Doesn't matter what it is. So now we're going to go over the airplane, and the first thing that I'm going to check is just to make sure everything from a mechanical and construction standpoint is sturdy. So I'm just wiggling the wings, making sure that the wings are good and tight, the prop is good and tight, spinner is tight. I'm taking a look at all of the hinges, and the hinges on this are really high quality hinges. These are pin hinges, not foam hinges, but I'm still going to take a look at it. If it is a foam hinge, I'll actively deflect the hinge and take a look to see if there's any breakage or anything like that. I'm going to take a look, turn the airplane over, and I'm just going to take a look at the gear and make sure that the oleos are good and tight, and they are. There's not really any play there. And while I've got the airplane turned over, I'm going to take a look at all of the push rods to make sure that the keepers on the servo arm end and the ball links are properly engaged everywhere. And they are. This airplane actually has fully retractable gear, including a retractable tail wheel, which is pretty nice. And I notice it has, these are some speaker. Does it have a sound system yet or no?
It was originally set up for a sound system that they no longer make, and RC Sound doesn't make his anymore. So chances of finding a sound system are probably nil to none. But it was originally set up for it.
Okay. All right. All right. So wings are bolted on good. Everything looks reasonably good. Wheels roll free. Roll that tail wheel, Carl. It's good and free and easy. Okay. So we've basically mechanically checked the airplane out. So now I'm going to electronically check it out. So we'll turn Carl's DX18 on. And I've already taken a peek in the transmitter. He is running a Spectrum AR630 AS3X and safe receiver. We don't have any of that stuff programmed yet. Give the airplane a chance to initialize. And it has. So now that everything is initialized, I'm going to visually take a look at all of the control surfaces and make sure that everything is centered, and it is. And I'm going to just make sure that everything is going in the proper direction. A mistake I see a lot of people make is they move the control surfaces to make sure they move, but they don't check the direction. And that's why guys take off with ailerons reversed and end up rolling the plane into the ground on the first flight. So you want to make sure that you don't do that. And let's see, let's get into the transmitter and take a look at the Expo. Carl does have a throttle cut set up on this. It is engaged, and I checked that before we plugged it up. And I'm all right with the Expo and the throw. I noticed this thing has got quite a bit of aileron deflection. That's more than enough elevator deflection. The rudder doesn't really have a ton of rudder deflection. And this airplane, I just remember reading about it, makes quite a bit of torque, and spiraling slipstream and all the other stuff makes an airplane go left. So since we do not have AS3X set up yet, I'm going to go into the servo setup, and I'm going to crank the travel on the rudder up on both sides a good bit, just to give myself the best chance. I would rather have too much throw and back it off later. I can always dissipate some of the throw with Expo, but I want to be able to counter the torque. I want to be able to get a good flare and have enough elevator to land the airplane well, maybe three-pointed if I want to. I don't want to be able to take it to a complete stall. One of the big things I see people do when they made an airplane is they take it off and they don't have anywhere near enough throw to have all the control of the plane that you need if something bad happens. I want enough throw to have full control. And that may mean that I've got too much to begin with, but I'd rather start that way, put in a bunch of Expo to counter that, and then back it off later if I don't need it. But if you need it and you don't have it, you could be in trouble on a Maiden. Okay, so one more thing that I didn't check and just wanted to show I'm always going to check this. I wanted to get it on camera. I want to check Carl's flap settings. So I'm going to take a look at his takeoff flap setting, which I'm perfectly comfortable with. Landing flap setting. That is just a little bit much for my taste. So I'm actually going to back that off just a hair, not a whole lot. And then he doesn't have, actually you do have some elevator compensation in there, don't you? All right.
Takeoff flaps, landing flaps.
We're going to go with what you've got and just kind of see what happens. Obviously on the Maiden, if I put the flaps down and the elevator compensation isn't exactly right, I can just put the flaps up and land without them the first time. We've got enough runway to be able to do that. So one other thing, anytime you're checking an airplane over that has flaps, you want to make sure in both the settings that the flaps are coming down at the same exact rate. So I want to get behind the airplane, visually check that. I'm going to go to the landing flap setting. I'm going to put the airplane on its nose and make sure that those are even. What you don't want is for your flap settings to have one flap down 1 degree and the other flap down a different degree, because then you have essentially ailerons put in, and the minute you put your flaps down, the airplane's going to turn. So that's definitely something you need to check. And at this point, now that we've checked all that, let's get this thing in the air. We are going to maiden this AS3X off. First, get it trimmed. Then we'll tell it to relearn servo settings in the gyro, and we'll turn the AS3X on and we'll tune that. Always before maiden with any airplane that has retracts, we do a gear check. We've got plenty of rudder to counter the tendency to go left a good bit with this plane. I just didn't use enough there. I've seen people go as far as test pilots do with full-scale planes a lot of times if they have retracts, and leave the retracts down on the first flight. I don't think that's necessary. This is a model, and if they work, they work. Put them up and trim the airplane out in the configuration you're going to fly it in the most anyway. Right here I'm going to do a quick clean stall test. Just want to have an idea what the airplane is going to do when it stalls, and being a P-51 and being scale, it should drop a wing, and it did. Next, I'll put the gear down and see how the airframe reacts to that after it's trimmed to gear up. Then we'll put the flaps down and check the elevator to flap compensation. If it happens to be right, I'll go ahead and do a dirty stall test. If it isn't, I'm just going to put the flaps either up or in the takeoff flap position and land and make an adjustment to the elevator to flap compensation, and that is the case here. I'm not liking the way it's feeling, so I'm going to land and make an adjustment. On this first landing, I'm not going to get cute. I'm going to come in and do a wheel landing so that I have a little bit of speed margin in my pocket. So, got it trimmed. I'm going to go into the flap system. Now on full flaps, she was really diving, so I'm going to take almost all of that out. So at this point, we're not going to make you guys watch every single aspect of what we're doing, but just so you know, I fixed the elevator to flap compensation issue, double checked that. Then we'll go into all the other aspects one at a time. I'll make sure that the control throw is where I need it for the type of maneuvering and flying that Carl wants to do, being able to get the airplane all the way to a stall, to land it well, including a 3-point. Make sure the roll rate is what he wants. Then we'll adjust the expo on each axis and adjust it for Carl's liking. And then once the airplane is completely set up from an airframe perspective, then we'll bring in AS3X, get all the gains and the priority dialed in, and make more adjustments to expo as we change the priority, because that's a thing you have to do. It takes time to really get an airplane set up, especially for someone else, but it's really good to help folks do that process, and I try to do that. So we got that done, and after we got the airplane set up, Carl let me take it up for a flight just to kind of show you folks what it can do. So here's that. Hope you enjoy it.
Fly in a heartbeat where the glow you're at, I really got to set up your
At this point in the day, the wind had picked up a good bit. The plane handled it well, certainly. The AS3X being dialed in correctly certainly helps. Really, the wind wasn't an issue much for this airplane until landing. The Freewing P-51 is a good flying airplane, but you can tell it's old school. It really shows its age by being a 4-cell powered plane. It's 1,400 millimeters. Used to be that all warbirds that size were 4-cell, Just about everything that size and up now is 6L, and while this outpowers all of the old school full-sail warbirds in this size range, it can't compare to the 6L stuff we have today. This is a nicely detailed P-51. One of the really cool features are the retractable landing lights that pop down when you retract the gear. It also has a sliding canopy and a very detailed cockpit and pilot figure. One thing about this P-51, a lot of the mass is well forward. There's not a lot of room to move a battery back in the forward battery bay. And the tail wheel is small, really hard plastic, so it doesn't really do much of a good job of grabbing the runway when the tail comes down. So hanging on to the tail of this thing on a landing can be difficult, especially in a crosswind. I hope this episode has been entertaining and insightful for those of you that are tasked with maidening airplanes for people. Take it seriously. Treat it like it was yours. They deserve that. And for those of you that are asking people to do it for you, at least now you know what to look for, so you can tell if somebody cares enough about your airplane to be doing it for you, or if you should maybe ask someone else. That's it for us. Take care of yourselves. Happy flying. We'll see you next week with something cool with wings.